What's up, fellas, and welcome to our January 2021 coaching video. We're going to jump right in, not waste any time, so make sure you have a Bible in front of you. Make sure you have maybe a journal, something to write with, something to write on, so we're taking notes as we go through our coaching video this month. Always want to remember and remind ourselves that this is more than just a practical assignment, more than just good advice. This is gospel download for everyday life as it concerns biblical masculinity, what God requires of us, how we act like men in our lives, how we lead our families, no matter what our station is. So this coaching is always going to be geared towards helping us build a lifelong strategy and game plan on how to be a godly man. It's basically discipleship 101. So I want to always leave you with practical advice. I want to always leave you with some steps to take every week. But at the end of the day, it's not moralism. It's not how good is my obedience, but everything we do is always rooted in the person and work of Jesus Christ. This is a gospel ministry. This is gospel coaching. So with that in mind, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 2 this month. Genesis chapter 2, verses 24 and 25. Genesis 2, 24 and 25, a very, very well-known passage, especially if you've ever been to a wedding. It's not only something that you hear a lot at weddings, but growing up, it was always my favorite verse to write on the car. As the newlyweds are always about to drive off, I always would put Genesis 2, 24 and 25, just so a man had something to look forward to as he drives off to his honeymoon. But anyhow, let me read it for us. Genesis 2, 24 and 25 says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." There's four things I want us to look at this month as we dive into these two verses. And what it is it's basic instructions for men. Basic instructions for men. And we see that at the beginning of the text. It says, "Therefore a man shall." And whatever comes afterwards is a description or an explanation for us and to us that plainly tells us this is how men act. This is what men do. This is how men are to behave. And so as we look at these things, remember, these are things for men. They're things for me. They're things for you to put into practice in your life. So let's jump right in. Number one, a man shall leave his father and his mother. Praise God for parents. Praise God for Christian families. Praise God for homes, places we can grow up in, learning what it means to be Christian, learning what it means to be a man. Sadly, we live in a day and age and in a culture where many, many people don't get the benefit of growing up in a Christian home. Some of you maybe had a godly father or at least a father in your life. Other men did not have a father in your life. And we can see, even in our culture, what the influence and the effect is on not having a father present in his home. But regardless of your situation, there comes a point in time in our lives where there's a leaving our identity and leaving who we were behind. And so the text says we leave father and mother. And what this is, the sort of the basic step for manhood, maybe the first step for manhood, is when this happens. Culturally, maybe it's when we become adults at 18, maybe when we finish high school and go off to college. For others, it's when they leave being single and get married. But whatever it is, wherever that line is drawn, there is a clear distinction that we leave our father and mother behind. It doesn't mean that we go a great distance. It doesn't mean that we leave the country, leave the state, leave them behind, we break the relationship off or anything like that. There's just a leaving of father and mother. And what it is, it's a forging of a new identity. A forging of a new identity. So no longer are we standing underneath, but now we're standing on our own 2 feet. I'm no longer directly underneath my parents in my identity, but now there's a new identity that starts with me. I'm no longer seen as a son, but I become the father. I become the man of my own house. Through my actions, through my growth, I become the patriarch of my own family. Even before I have a family, it's the leaving one thing and starting something completely new. I'm no longer in this house in this way. I now have a new house and I have a new identity. I'm the patriarch of my own family. I'm the Lord of my own castle. It's a new identity. It's how I view myself. It's how others view me. Instead of being known as the son of X, eventually people are going to be known as the son of whoever I am. It's a new identity, not only for myself, but also for all those who are attached to me. Wife, kids, grandkids, all of those things. There's the leaving of father and mother behind and the forging of a new identity. Not only is it a new identity, but it's a new independence. Because we're no longer on the receiving end, but now we're on the giving end. Instead of being provided for, we become the provider. Instead of being protected, we become the protector. We no longer look to others to provide for us, to fend for us, to do for us, but we look to ourselves, and now other people look on us. So basically, the first step of becoming a man is this identity and independence. In other words, it's a disconnect from the mothership. It's a disconnect from something or someone, these familial relations that are taking care of me and providing for me. And it's the creation of a new relationship. It's the creation of a new system. It's the creation of a new matrix where a new family and new identities are going to be forged, and fruit is going to come, and wife and kids and grandkids and all of these things that are the normal part of life happen because of this first and crucial step. Now, some of you guys are not there yet. Some of you guys may be still living at home, or you're unmarried. Others are maybe a few years into marriage. My wife and I are about to celebrate our 19th wedding anniversary. So this was a long time ago now for me, where there was a leaving mother and father behind, whether it's college, marriage, whatever it is. That's the first step. It's a step of independence. It's a step of identity. There's a leaving something behind. And the second step is very closely related to it, because we don't just leave something without acquiring something new. It's not just a disconnect, but now it's a connect to something else. This is often seen and potentially misunderstood in the Christian life. In the New Testament, we see that when we're outside of Christ, the Bible refers to us, especially in the book of Romans, as slaves to sin. And the beautiful part of Christianity, the beautiful part of salvation, is we're no longer slaves. But there's a very misunderstood aspect of what it means to no longer be a slave to sin. When we come to Christ, imagine we're bound in shackles to our sin. And those shackles are on our hands, those shackles are on our feet, and then the other side of those shackles are connected to sin. We're slaves to sin. We're bound to sin. And then Christ comes and sets us free. He releases us from the shackles. He releases us from the chains. Now, some people have in mind this picture that Christ comes and he takes literally the shackles that are connected to our hands and feet and just releases us, and now we're walking free. We're walking completely disconnected to anything. But that's not actually the biblical picture of being disconnected from sin and being disconnected from slavery. We are disconnected, but it's not the shackles that are on our wrists that get disconnected. It's the shackles that are attached to sin. It's the shackles that are attached to that enslavement of sin. Those shackles then get picked up and attached to something new, namely to Jesus himself. And so now I'm no longer a slave to sin, but I am a slave to righteousness. I am a slave of Christ. That's the biblical picture. And I know in our culture, slavery has always been a wicked and evil thing. But when we become Christians, we don't just disconnect from sin, but we connect to Jesus himself. We're not slaves of sin, but we're slaves of righteousness. We're not servants of sin, but we're servants of Christ. And so in that same vein, in that same sort of line and way of thinking, when we disconnect from mother and father in manhood, we don't just disconnect and wander aimlessly. The purpose of our disconnecting from family, the purpose of our disconnecting that former identity and former relationship is so that I can connect to something else, namely a wife, namely creating my own family, creating a new matrix for more God followers and disciples to come from. And so we disconnect from father and mother, we disconnect from the mothership, and now we connect to something else. So it says, a man shall leave father and mother and then hold fast to his wife. And so it's the process of finding and joining ourselves to a wife. Now, some of you guys, again, you might be single. Some might be young and single, never married. Other guys might find themselves in a position where they're single because they're divorced. Maybe you were divorced for a few years. You just got divorced, or you're in the process of getting divorced. Wherever you find yourself in life, this is for you. These principles are for you. You need to understand that this is for you, especially if you've already been in a relationship and maybe that relationship didn't work. Maybe you've already tasted the sting of divorce. And before you go into a new relationship, before you consider a new marriage or remarriage, you need to think through these principles, the disconnecting from one thing and the connecting to something else. And so what we're connecting to in this case is a wife, a future wife. If you're married, it's the wife you have now. Sometimes people get confused about the situation they're in and they're like, I'm not sure about God's will for my life, but I can tell you this, if you're married right now, God's will is for you to remain married, if at all possible. There are always circumstances where an unbelieving person departs, or maybe you weren't saved before, or maybe you did a lot of damage, you caused a lot of carnage in your marriage, and the result, consequence of that is a divorce. You're not necessarily bound or enslaved by your former actions or your disobedience or sin, anything that's damaged your life. But whatever you do from here on out, you need to remember these things. You need to take these things to heart. Consider these things before beginning any kind of relationship, specifically a marriage relationship, because that's what God has called all of us to. Every man, I'll say this, every man should be married. Every man should get married. I know a lot of single dudes are going to hear this, and for the overwhelming majority of all of you, God's will for your life is to get married. Now, I don't want us to get confused, because the Bible does talk about this in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul talks about a gift, but I would encourage you this, that the gift he's talking about is celibacy, not singleness. Celibacy, not singleness. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 mentions this. There's some different verses in the epistles where he talks about this, but I would simply refer you to a wonderful blog post. It was an article back from November of 2020 by the pastor named Doug Wilson. Just Google Doug Wilson, singleness as an affliction, and you will understand what he's teaching, and I would agree with his position. So I would encourage every young man to get married, especially those that have already done the leaving. If you've done the leaving of your father and mother, it's time to be in the pursuit of finding and joining yourself to a wife, holding fast to your wife. And so in this process, this most natural and beautiful picture and process in life, it's important for every man that when we leave, we're leaving with the purpose of joining ourselves to someone else, to again create a new identity, to create a new independence, but to bear fruit, to exercise dominion over ourselves, our marriage, our family, our wives, our kids, and to build what God has called us to build, to have dominion, exercise dominion, to create wealth and opportunities and business, and to be involved in a community and thrive, and to see the world around us thriving and underneath the direction and the leadership and the lordship of Jesus Christ. And part of that is the matrix of creating and having a family. So hold fast to your wife. Just as we leave father and mother, just like that is figurative, holding fast to our wife is also figurative. But just as leaving father and mother is also literal, holding fast to our wife is also a literal thing. The word itself means to cling to cleave to attach ourselves to, and to join, to hold on to that. And so there's a disconnecting from the mothership, and then there's a connecting with the mother of our children. regardless of whether or not you and your wife can have kids, whether or not you do have kids, whether or not you just got married, you've been married for 10 years. Again, the ordinary part of life, the average example, what is true for most people is there's a leaving, there's a joining, and after that joining, there's now the production of fruit, namely children from this marriage and this family. So we leave father and mother, we join to our wife. We disconnect from the mothership, we connect with the mother of our kids. And then comes the third part. A man shall do this: leave, cleave, and then become one flesh. And here's what I want you to understand as well as myself. No matter where you are in life, single, been married a couple years, married and divorced, been married a while, understand this. The becoming one flesh is a process. Becoming is a process, just like becoming a man was a process. If you remember back to one of our coaching videos a few months ago, we talked about 1 Corinthians 13:11. Paul said, when I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish ways. Becoming a man doesn't happen necessarily in an instant. It's a process. But that process has a very definite beginning. The process has a very clear mark or moment in our life where it's clear that manhood is now upon us. And for us as men, that beginning is the leaving, it's the cleaving, and then it's the becoming. It's leaving, holding fast to, clinging to my wife, becoming one with her. I've been married almost 19 years, and I can tell you this, that the first few years were rough. There was a lot of things I didn't understand about how to be a man, how to be a husband, how to be a father. But now, after almost 19 years, I can tell you that it has been the most beautiful part of my life, becoming one flesh with my wife. So understand that good marriages take time. Good relationships take time. Good marriages take work. They take lots of work. And we fail. We fail miserably. Sometimes we fail really miserably. I've done enough in my marriage that if my wife decided to walk away from it, anyone who would have heard what I had done would have said, oh yeah, makes complete sense that she walked away from that. I completely deserved to be walked away from. But by the grace of God, many men like myself have experienced grace and forgiveness, and we did not lose our marriage. But either way, if you're in a marriage, not in a marriage, or you want to be in a marriage, whether it's your first marriage or a new marriage, a good marriage is going to take time, and a good marriage is going to take work. It doesn't matter who you are or where you are in life, single, married, divorced, we all need to hear and understand these things. So leaving, clinging, joining, holding fast, becoming one flesh. Just like leaving is figurative and literal, joining a wife is figurative and literal. Also, holding fast, becoming one with our wives is also both figurative and literal. There's a beautiful picture in marriage that this gives us, becoming one flesh with a wife. And there's something even in ancient Greek mythology, there was this animal, sometimes it looks almost like a gargoyle. It's called the chimera. It was the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and the tail of a snake. And the whole idea, the whole picture is in one body, one organism, one animal, you have multiple species. And so even in modern science, there's something called microchimerism, I guess is how you say it. But what scientists have discovered is that even decades after a pregnancy, a man's DNA can still be found inside his wife's body. There's a literal and a figurative joining of the flesh. There's two people becoming one in the sense of their identity, but also their physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and their sexual union. And so this is a process in marriage from the first night of the honeymoon to 25 years in, where there's the continual joining, the continual coming together, the continual becoming one. in staying home, staying connected in that relationship, in that marriage. So there was a disconnect from the mothership, there's a connecting with the mother of our kids, and now there's the staying home with the wife of our youth. Staying home with the wife of our youth. Listen to Proverbs 5. It says, drink water, verses 15 through 19. Drink water from your own cistern. It's a well, an underground well. Flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets? Let them be for yourself and yourself alone, and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love. Leaving, holding fast, becoming one. And here's the last part. It says, the man was with his wife. They were both naked and not ashamed. This is an obvious reference to a sexual union in marriage, a most beautiful and wonderful part of the marriage relationship, right? An incredible gift from God, this sexual coming together and union between a man and his wife. It's the purpose of the leaving, the purpose of the coming together and holding fast, the purpose of becoming one is so that in the marriage relationship, we can be naked and not ashamed. But it's more than just a physical union. It's more than just a sexual union. Again, we're talking literal and figurative. Over the course of a normal marriage, a man and his wife are unable to keep things from one another. You become incapable of hiding things from your husband or your wife. You get to know each other so well, you can take one look at them and know that something's wrong. You can take one look at them and know that they're lying. You can take one look at them and know that something is not right because it's impossible to hide. There's a nakedness. We can't hide things from one another. Our bodies, our minds, our souls are laid bare before one another every day in marriage. Our strengths, our weaknesses, our failures, they become visible and evident in marriages. And so many marriages, listen to me right here, so many marriages get in trouble right here in this place. They experience difficulty not only because of sin, not only because of failure, not only because of weakness, but marriages struggle because sin and failure and weakness have been hidden and concealed oftentimes for years. Struggles that maybe you had when you were single, things that you didn't want to tell your fiance, your soon-to-be wife, because you didn't think she would accept those things. You didn't think she would be able to forgive those things. And so we hide these things from one another. And so what happens is we create problems in our marriage because of our inability to be vulnerable, our inability to be honest, our inability to tell the truth. And so there is beauty in knowing and being known. There's beauty in the fact that somebody knows who I really am, my strengths, my weaknesses, my failures, the places I've been, the things I've done, the things that I continue to do, my inner and outward struggles. There's a beauty in someone knowing that and still forgiving me, choosing to forgive, choosing to love, choosing to embrace not only my strengths and my weaknesses. It's even woven into marriage vows, for better or worse, sickness and health, richer or poor, as long as we both shall live. There's a becoming one flesh. There's a holding fast. There's a nakedness and not being ashamed. It's the beauty of being seen, the beauty of being known, the beauty of being desired, accepted, and loved. So we disconnect from the mothership. We connect with the mother of our kids, right? We stay in that relationship. We hold fast to the wife of our youth, and now we have the courage. We must, as men, have the courage to be the real you. You have to be open. You have to be honest. You have to be humble. You have to be vulnerable in marriage or any relationship, or it cannot work. And understand that it's only because of Jesus Christ that this is even possible. There's no woman, there's no human being that can just forgive any and everything because she has the strength of character. But it's understanding the nature of the gospel that allows us to see and understand and experience and love and forgive. And let me just mention this in passing. I don't want to get bogged down here, but listen to this. It's a word about nakedness and a word about evil and the need to cover things. in chapter 2 of Genesis, and again, I just want to say this because I speak to so many men that like to downplay their weakness when it comes to their sexual brokenness. So many men just want to kind of sweep it under the rug and act like this isn't a huge area in our lives. But it is. It is for me. It is for you. It is for every single man. So hear me. In Genesis chapter 2, in these two verses, there was a leaving, a cleaving, there was a coming together, becoming one flesh. Both man and his wife were naked and unashamed, right? Naked and unashamed. One chapter later, the knowledge of evil exists, and here we see a woman covering herself, and the only other person around is her husband, right? Knowing evil exists, and the first reaction was to cover nakedness. Because outside of Jesus, our eyes and our minds cannot be trusted, right? Because of the weakness of the human flesh. Don't believe me? Read the Old Testament. Don't believe me? Read the New Testament. Don't believe me? Read 1 Corinthians chapter 7. They were both naked and not ashamed. But just a few verses later, they had something to be ashamed of, and they hid themselves and they covered themselves. And realize this too. They were both naked. Men, it's a two-way street in our relationships. It's a two-way street in our marriages. It's not just telling the truth about ourselves so that our wives can know us, choose to embrace us, love us, forgive us, stay with us, but she's going to expose herself as well. She won't be able to hide her weaknesses. She won't be able to hide her fears. She won't be able to hide her insecurities. And it's your responsibility as a husband to love and to forgive and to cover and to bless and to accept, right? It's our job to lead in this way. This knowledge, this intimacy, this nakedness, and the freedom that comes with not being ashamed. So here's the practical and tactical for this month. Here's where the rubber meets the road. First step of manhood. A man shall do this. Disconnect. It's becoming independent. Forging that new identity. Dudes, where are you at? Are you attached still to mama's tit, so to speak? It's time to detach and grow up and become a man. Number 2, you need to get connected to a God-loving, God-fearing woman, and you need to be loyal to her the rest of your life, right? It's a most natural part of life. Finding a woman who loves Jesus, finding a woman who loves you, marry her, have children with her, bless her, be her partner, be her leader, be her lover, be her friend. Number 3, be faithful all the days of your life, even in your weaknesses, even in your struggles. Be honest, be vulnerable, be faithful to your wife. She is a gift from God for you. And no matter where you are, it has to cost you something before it costs you anything. You're going to have the difficult conversations. You're going to have to look at someone and let them know the reality, the struggle, the nature of what it is to be you and what it means to be you. You have to be honest. You have to be vulnerable. You have to be humble. And confession needs to become a part of your life. It's part of what we do in Proverbs XXX Club. We're teaching ourselves, we're teaching others to be honest about the very worst about us, because we understand that those weaknesses, that sin has been covered by the blood of Jesus Christ. And we live now in the freedom of being able to tell the truth about ourselves, understanding the weakness, understanding the failures, understanding that Christ paid for the weakness and failures, and then embracing what that looks like in the covenant of marriage with a woman who loves Jesus. We love each other. We serve each other. We're honest with each other. We forgive each other. We cover each other, pray for one another, and we're faithful and loyal to each other, all because of Jesus. I love you guys. I appreciate you. If there's anything you need, make sure you hit me up. All our information and resources are on our website, proverbsxxxclub.com. If for some reason you're watching this and you're not a part of our club, make sure you go to our website. Again, proverbsxxxclub.com. Click on the tab that says join and join the club today. If you haven't been to a meeting yet, I look forward to connecting with you at one of our club meetings soon. And then also make sure you're at our monthly event at the end of every month, the last Saturday of every month, called Man Church. I look forward to seeing you guys in February.